Welcome to Peachtree Injury Talk with attorney Jordan Jewkes.
Hello and welcome to Peachtree Injury Talk with experienced attorney Jordan Jewkes. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about Georgia wrongful death claims. Jordan, great to see you.
Thanks, Kevin. I enjoy speaking with you and glad to be back.
Yeah, for sure. So can you start by telling our listeners what exactly constitutes a wrongful death claim in Georgia?
Yeah, and this is a very serious subject, an unfortunate subject to have to talk about, but a wrongful death claim in Georgia, just very generally defined, is when a person causes the death of another through negligence. And when we say negligence, we're talking about when they accidentally do something. If they do it on purpose, then it becomes a criminal act or homicide. But in our context, in civil litigation, it's when they negligently cause an injury, negligently cause the death of another. And that's very often in a car wreck or something similar.
What other types of incidents often lead to wrongful death claims?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen wrongful death claims in many contexts. Car wrecks, trucking wrecks are very, very common. You see them, honestly, in the medical malpractice context a lot. Doctor does something wrong. We've had a case where someone who was mentally ill was allowed to leave the hospital without supervision, without notifying the family, and that person essentially went and died through another way very shortly afterwards. And so there's a claim, therefore, against the hospital. So they can happen in a variety of contexts. You can build an unsafe structure somehow, and then a worker on that structure falls because the structure wasn't built according to code or something like that and dies. That can be a wrongful death claim as well.
Yeah. Who is eligible to file a wrongful death claim in Georgia?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it depends on a series of ifs. But typically, the spouse would have the right. The married partner then would have the right to bring a claim. If you are not married, then it would typically be children if you have children. And then if no children, no marriage, then it would be the parents. Sometimes it's someone with no living parents, no spouse, no children. You could then set up an estate for that person through a friend or someone appointed by the court to do it. But typically it's spouse, then children, living children, and then parents. And one of the interesting things about that is more than one person can actually set up a wrongful death claim in theory. You kind of want to avoid that if possible, because that's going to create some fighting usually. But yeah, more than one person can do it sometimes.
What are the steps involved? What's the process for filing a claim?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Essentially, you have to notify the insurance company like anyone else and tell them you're pursuing a wrongful death claim. I think it's important to sort of make a distinction here on two types of claims within sort of the wrongful death scenario. This is kind of important because a lot of people may leave one of these out, but there are two types of claims within a wrongful death claim. One of them is the wrongful death claim itself. And that is essentially for the death of that person and the value of their life. That one may seem kind of obvious, but the other one is just as important, and it's called the estate claim. And Kevin, this one is a little bit different, but you really want to bring both if at all possible. So there's really a wrongful death claim, and then there's an estate claim. The estate claim covers is brought by the estate of the deceased individual, which again is usually their spouse, child, or a parent. But it is actually able to capture or claim compensation for the fright that the person had prior to being injured. They're actually able to be compensated for the medical bills and the funeral costs associated with that. And you may be saying, well, what do you mean by the fright? If someone is in an car accident, let's say they're at a stop sign and they see an 18-wheeler coming at them, and they know they're going to be hit even for a second or two prior to that happens. That's a frightening experience.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, hey, look, my loved one passed, and in the few moments before she passed, she knew her life was going to end. That can be a significant recovery, and as well it should be for that family, knowing that their family loved one didn't go in a way they wanted to or peaceful at home. So yeah, there's two different claims in that, and it's important to know the both.
You mentioned before about filing both when you can. Are there different situations where you can and can't, or is it just that people don't know that they can?
Yeah, it's more that people don't know that they can. I mean, there's some situations where, a wrongful death claim, or rather the estate claim, is going to be fairly nominal, maybe just funeral costs, if the death was sudden and there was no pain associated with it. And that can happen. And frankly, hopefully, when someone passes because of the negligence of someone else, hopefully they don't suffer. But there are tremendous examples of, you think about, there's been several cases in Georgia where someone was rear-ended and their car caught on fire. But really, a competent attorney is going to advise you in almost every case to line up both the estate claim and the wrongful death claim.
Do you recommend people reach out to an attorney kind of right away?
Yeah, and that's tough to do sometimes. You're grieving for a loved one.
Yeah, your brain's not there, right? You're not thinking about that.
And there's no reason it really should be. You want to be able to grieve. But one of the important reasons you want to be able to do that, especially in the context of a car wreck or trucking wreck or structural, defect. Unfortunately, if you don't reach out to an attorney in adequate time, sometimes the evidence that's essential, evidence at the scene, will be lost. Photos, interviewing, camera footage, basic evidence that will show that the other party was at fault can be lost if you don't do some type of investigation. And usually just making a call to an attorney and someone you trust is going to be enough to at least let you grieve for the loss in your family, while also behind the scenes and making sure that the right evidence and documentation is collected.
The steps are in motion.
This may sound strange, but I think one of the most important aspects of a wrongful death claim is, what was said and what happens at the funeral. And again, may sound weird, but getting the brochure or the handouts and the cards given at the funeral, it's just important evidence. So, I mean, funerals, they should be a celebration of that person's life, right? I mean, we're grieving and we're mourning, but what people say at a funeral is very often who that person was, that deceased person. And they paint a fantastic, wonderful picture of them. And sometimes getting a little bit of that even goes a long way in the court system, because you're really recreating that in the court system to say, hey, look, my client who passed away was a father or mother and had children and loving parents and was loved by his associates at work. And here they are, and they all came together at this funeral and celebrated the life of that person. And so it's important to sort of, and when appropriate, to be able to document that.
Yeah. What types of damages can be recovered in a wrongful death claim?
We kind of went over the estate damages. It's really going to be the funeral costs, the medical costs, if there was an attempt to, help that person, and the pain and suffering that they felt. But on the wrongful death side of that, so that's the estate side. On the wrongful death side, again, it's a little bit confusing, but it's really going to be the value of that person's life, right? And you may say, well, how do you quantify that? How do you quantify the life of a baby? We've got a case right now where there's an unborn baby that we're bringing a wrongful death claim. A baby that was, an embryo or a fetus that was 8 months developed. And the law allows us to pursue a wrongful death claim. Well, what's the value of that? What's the value of someone who's in their later years? So what we do, what the law allows you to do is quantify or describe or value that person's life through the lens of those around them. So you have to get friends, family, loved ones to talk about what that person was like and what they contributed to society. And so through their perspective, their lens, that's how you begin to quantify the value of a life under the wrongful death statute, under the wrongful death claim.
Okay. Are there any general guidelines for how to determine the compensation amount, or is it really just kind of case by case?
It's really case by case.
Yeah.
I mean, really the question is, how do you value someone's life? And it's impossible to say. If you're asking if there's a code section that says, hey, if they're this age, then your life is that, the answer to that is no. And so, it's really a case by case. And so you've got to have an attorney that knows how to gather that evidence and to be able to present it in such a way to maximize the value of the claim. Because, truly anyone knows that there's really not a value you can put on anyone's life, but there are ways to sort of prove that and to show it to a court.
Are things like lost wages and stuff, is that taken into account?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a doctor that's earning a significant amount of money every year who's deceased because of an injury is going to presumably be able to show a very significant lost wage claim, and you can be able to recover that under the estate portion of the
That's
claim.
the estate portion. Okay.
Yeah. And that can be significant. Absolutely. And so that doctor's spouse should be able to recover that as well.
Another reason to make sure you're looking at both options there, both situations of the estate and the wrongful death claim.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing, sorry to interrupt you, is when you file a lawsuit, you need to articulate both within the paperwork. And there are some time limits there. We won't get into that, but that you just need to make sure you're articulating both the estate claim and the wrongful death claim when you file the lawsuit or when you present the claim to the insurance company.
Okay. And what are some of the challenges you see families face when they're pursuing a wrongful death claim?
I mean, it's just a tough thing to do. I mean, you experience the death of a loved one, a parent, a spouse, or heaven forbid, a child, and to be able to go and to be able to articulate that. There's no family member that anxiously does that. In other words, that says, hey, I volunteer to help in this process. Right. Of course, they all want it to go smoothly and to work out, but no one wants to be directly involved because it's a sad thing and it's very often a tragic thing. And, if it's medical malpractice, if it's a structure or a premise liability, or if it's a car wreck, there's just no part of that claim that is easy. And so just having to deal with the death itself is the hardest part, and then having to deal with the legal ramifications of it is almost like pouring salt or vinegar on a wound.
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of times people say the funeral is hard because it's like you're trying to get over this grief and stuff, and the funeral is really tough, but then you throw something like that on top of that, and that's a whole nother animal.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this is totally unfair, but it's almost like rehashing or going through that funeral every time you have a legal hearing, and certainly the court hearing. And most of us want to move on and grieve and heal in that process. And so for that reason alone, wrongful death claims can be difficult mentally, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually even. Most of us seek some type of spiritual healing, when someone passes, and sometimes the claim itself, especially when it's defended by the insurance company and they try and say, well, we didn't cause that. It can be tough in the healing process for anybody.
Yeah, definitely. Is there are situations where people may not file maybe not know that there was a wrongful death situation and file it later on, especially I suppose with medical malpractice? Yeah,
you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say with medical malpractice cases, those are very often hotly contested. They're going to be defended. They're very, very difficult to prove. But, at the end of the day, the process is the same. Because of your negligence in medical malpractice, it's the violation of the standard of care. You did what other doctors would not have done in that same situation, resulting in the loss of a loved one. That's very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any sort of timeline, like a statute of limitations kind of thing that you have to bring a claim by?
Yeah, and that gets a little complicated, but yeah, generally speaking, 2 years. It's never going to be less than 2 years. And so, if you think that a loved one may have passed because of the negligence of another, then you want to talk to an attorney, very soon so that they can advise you on all the deadlines. But there are absolutely deadlines that have to be followed, and there's exceptions to some of them. But generally speaking, you want to take action before 2 years.
How do you and your firm help guide and support families through these cases? Obviously, we've talked about how heavy they are, how there's people grieving, and it's hard to, their mental functions are probably not firing, like they normally would because they're not sleeping and they're grieving and they're sad. How do you kind of guide them through the process?
I mean, I like to think that's what makes our firm a little bit different is we're going to treat every client, regardless of whether it's a wrongful death claim or what I would call the more basic, car wreck claim where there's, maybe some minor injuries. We want everyone to feel like they're a part of their family, and they deserve that from their attorney and their staff, and to openly communicate with them, to be a shoulder to cry on, to be able to listen to their concerns, and to be able to just give them the advice that they need, and maybe not often what they want to hear, but give them the advice that they need so that they can get closure to the process, whatever it is, wrongful death or just what I would call a more ordinary injury claim.
Does it get difficult for you to with some of these cases that are a little bit or a lot bit heavy and sad?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and every wrongful death, there's no question, and you're not a human being if you're working in a professional context and don't feel some, empathy and love for your client. Because when that client places their trust in you to help get some type of, closure for what their loved one has been through, you kind of become a member of their family as well. And it's hard to not grieve and to feel compassion for that family, for their loss. And frankly, honestly, I think that makes you a better attorney, and you want to ultimately tell the story of that family. And so you need to have a very wonderful and authentic level of trust and compassion and empathy for that family member. And so necessarily, I think it is tough, and you do grieve with them and you mourn with them, and you want them to get through it as soon as possible so they can get final closure for it.
And I'm assuming that, the insurance companies, as we've talked about before, they never really want to pay a claim. So these can probably take some time, huh? These cases?
Yeah, and every case is different. We've handled multiple of them. I mean, we've had one where another driver came into the lane of our insured or not our insured, our client, and struck him, and pretty sure it was an instantaneous death. We've had some were involving tractor trailer injuries, and again, we've had some involving medical malpractice ones. Every case is going to be different. If the law enforcement officer is on the scene of a wreck, do a good job. And that's something I should say is in Georgia, if there's a death on the road, almost always the Georgia State Patrol is going to send out their special unit. It's called their SCRT team, SCRT, and they will go in and do a really in-depth investigation to determine fault, examining the roadways, photos of everything, photos the family usually does not want to see, and just a very in-depth investigation that can take easily 6 months or a year. And so, yes, there's a lot of aspects there.
Well, and just more important to have a compassionate attorney to help you through the way. I'm not even trying to be salesy here. I'm just saying like that's to try to take that burden off of a grieving family is huge.
Yeah, and that's you're exactly right. I mean, a basic function of this is just, hey, let us handle the legal side of this, the paperwork, the phone calls, so you can grieve and mourn with your loved ones.
Yeah. Well, heavy topic, but definitely one that needs to be discussed. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on Peachtree Injury Talk with experienced attorney Jordan Jewkes. If you'd like to get in touch with Jordan, his website is jewkesfirm.com, and please like and subscribe to the channel and stay up to date with everything Georgia injury law. Hey, Jordan, always great to see you. Thanks for all the info.
You too. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.